Chapter 8, Taking Practice Exams the Right Way. Practice exams may seem like one of the best ways to gauge your readiness for Step 1, but they simply aren't. One of the reasons why is because the content distribution for most practice exams don't align with the content distribution for Step 1. As a result, they are not as reliable of a metric as assessing readiness for Step 1. It's just what it is. Yet, you can't afford not to take a practice exam because there can be some valuable insights from your experience. Therefore, they need to be used strategically. This chapter explains how to schedule your practice exams, analyze your performance, and adjust your study plan based on your test results. I also share tips for building endurance for the long exam day. So what you can expect from this chapter, understand the role of practice exams, how the NBME practice exams and also the UWorld self-assessments are used to simulate Step 1, how to interpret your scores by learning how to analyze your performance, identify weak areas, and understand the significance of your test results in relation to your progress, approach scheduling strategically, when to take a practice exam, how often, and how to use them as checkpoints throughout your dedicated study period. Reviewing mistakes. Why reviewing wrong answers is as important, if not more, than getting the right answer, and how to convert mistakes into learning opportunities. And lastly, building stamina for the test day. Practice exams not only test your knowledge, but also help you develop mental and physical endurance needed for the actual Step 1 exam. Why practice exams matter. Taking practice exams is one of the most important parts of Step 1 preparation. Not only do they provide a snapshot of your current knowledge, but they also simulate the actual exam experience with an asterisk. If used correctly, practice exams can help you refine your test-taking strategy, build endurance, and identify weak areas that need more attention. However, there's a right and wrong way to use practice exams. Simply taking one isn't enough. You need to approach them strategically to get the most benefit. Choosing the right practice exams for you. There are several options when it comes to practice exams, but not all practice exams are created equal. Here's how I rank the most useful practice exams for Step 1 prep. My main one is UWorld self-assessments. These are probably the closest in format and question style to the real Step 1 exam. After taking it twice, I definitely have a lot of experience with Step 1 in particular. UWorld's interface and questions are similar to what you could actually see on test day, and making these practice exams ideal for refining your skills is very much needed. And so UWorld self-assessments are the top one for me. Then we have our NBME forms, and those are the forms 25 through 31 at this point. I think they have about 7 or 8 of them. While they're not as representative in terms of the testing interface, there's 50 questions across 4 blocks. So you get 200 questions, but there's 50 questions across 4 blocks. And so it's not reflective of the 40 question style blocks that you're going to get on the actual exam. The NBME is still an essential, valuable thing because they provide a good benchmark for where you stand. Since NBME creates the actual Step 1 exam, these exams will help you gauge your readiness. I will say that it is still the second on my list, and mainly because the interface is a lot better on UWorld than it is on the NBME. And most of the NBME exam questions are retired board questions, and so they're not ones that are actually going to be used. Third on the list is the Amboss self-assessment. And this one is an annual event that's offered by Amboss that gives you an opportunity to assess your Step 1 readiness for free. The Amboss self-assessment week includes a full-length exam with a detailed analysis of your performance. While it's a solid option to get familiar with clinical reasoning, Amboss generally doesn't mimic the interface of the real exam as closely as UWorld does. However, it provides high-quality questions that challenge your clinical knowledge, and the results analysis can help pinpoint areas you need to improve on. Keep in mind that while the content coverage is good, it's not as representative of the biostats and communications heavy nature of Step 1 as it is today. And that could be said for the NBMEs as well. USMLE RX is another solid practice tool that offers a full set of Step 1 questions designed to correlate with first aid and USMLE Step 1. The key strength of USMLE RX is its heavy integration with first aid, which helps refine key concepts while testing your knowledge. However, the interface and the question style may not be as reflective of the real Step 1 exam compared to UWorld or MBME. And so this is a good supplement resource for solidifying foundational knowledge, but for exam simulation, it just doesn't quite match the other ones that I mentioned. And then lastly, the free 120s. The official 120 question sample test that USMLE offers every single year. It's a short full-length exam. It's about 3 blocks, but highly representative of the content style that you'll take for that year. And so if you're taking the free 120 from the previous year, it probably won't be as reflective of this year's content, but it's a good gauge. And so if you need some practice, you could use these. The only caveat is that it doesn't allow for you to review the questions. And so you have to do well with finding a third-party resource to help you review the questions that you missed. When to take a practice exam? It's important to space out your practice exams in a way that allows you to measure progress without burning out. Here's the general schedule that I would recommend. We're going to start our test preparation with the practice exam early, probably the first couple of days, right? Ideally, you want to take your first full length during the first week of your dedicated study. This will give you a good baseline score and a sense of where you stand, and also just to get your feet wet in terms of the interface and everything. Then you're going to start taking one every 2 to 3 weeks. After your initial exam, schedule a practice exam every 2 to 3 weeks. This gives you enough time to improve based on your previous performance without overwhelming yourself with constant studying and testing. And to put that into context, right? Phase 1, you start off with the practice exam, day 1. From there, you spend 2 weeks focusing on the first pass of the left side of UWorld. Then you take a practice exam after that. Then you move on to phase 2, which is doing your 80 question blocks. And the goal is to try to get a level of consistency with that 80 question blocks and getting your review done. And after that, you take another practice exam. Then in phase 3, you're working on fine-tuning everything. And after that, you take another practice exam. And then once you get into phase 4, then that's where you're starting to take a practice exam less than 2 weeks apart. And so in your final weeks before your exam, during the last 2 weeks, I would recommend taking at least 1 to 2 practice exams to fine-tune your strategy. These should be used to assess your readiness, identify any lingering areas that are weak, and building confidence. What I wouldn't recommend is you taking a practice exam more than once a week. And mainly because, say you take a practice exam and you have total 7 days, right? You have a total 7 days. You take a practice exam day 1. Then it takes maybe 1 or 2 days to review it. So you're down to 3 days. And so you only have 4 days left in 7 days. You already know that one of those days is going to be a half day that allows you to just review and you're not doing any practice questions, right? So now you have 4 days down that you can't do practice questions. That leaves you with only 3 days to implement any of the stuff that you are actually trying to fine tune or practice or try to apply into your actual studying. It only gives you 3 days before you try to do another practice exam. Give yourself a little more time. You want to extend that out. And so you could do that with 7 days, but you want to make sure you give yourself a good 3 to 4 days of applying the things that you need to work on into your study regimen. Going back-to-back practice exams without having the opportunity to review and actually put that into practice doesn't do you any good. It's kind of a waste of time. And you're kind of just burning through practice exams, and they can be pretty expensive sometimes. So don't do that to yourself. How to analyze your test results. Taking a practice exam is only half the battle. You need to spend just as much time analyzing your performance to get the most out of the value. So here's how I would recommend breaking down your test results. Focus on areas, not just the overall score. So categories, systems. While your overall score is important, pay close attention to how you performed in specific system categories. Did you perform poorly in biochem, but excel in anatomy? Use this information to guide your study plan moving forward. Identify patterns in wrong answers. So look for patterns in the questions you missed. Were they mostly due to a knowledge gap, misinterpretation of the question, or a timing issue? Understanding why you got the question wrong will help you tailor your review and practice more effectively. And then obviously we're going to target our weaknesses, right? Based on your analysis, refocus your study efforts on the areas where you're consistently underperforming. This might mean creating more focused question blocks in UWorld or adding specific Anki cards for reinforcement. Again, we want to reiterate the clinical clues, the crib sheets, those are your holy grail. So if these gaps are not on those, you better put those on those and you commit those to memory. Building endurance. Step 1 isn't just a mental test, it's a physical and emotional test. The exam lasts about 8 hours and you'll be answering 280 questions in total. One of the key benefits of practice exams is that they help you build the endurance necessary to get through the real test without losing focus or energy. Last thing you need is to be hungry, tired, lethargic. You don't need that during the exam. You could enjoy all the rest you want after you take the exam and you get through it. And so here's how practice exams can help you build that endurance. It helps you simulate exam conditions. When you take a practice exam, do them under exam conditions that mirror the actual exam. Sit down for the full duration, take breaks according to the rules, limit distractions, and also start the same time you are going to start during your exam, right? So if the exam starts at 8 o'clock, you should be in that seat ready to go on your practice exam day at 8 o'clock. This will help you get used to the mental and physical demands of the test, right? It shouldn't be a surprise on test day because you practiced weeks and weeks and weeks leading up to that. Pace yourself. One of the most important aspects of step 1 is the time management. Practice pacing yourself by sticking to the 60-minute time limit for each block and managing your breaks carefully. Give yourself X amount of time, so a total of 45 minutes of break time for this should be plenty. Train your brain for stamina. Just like training for a marathon, gradually build your stamina up by practicing with full-length exams rather than just individual question blocks. This will help you maintain focus and prevent fatigue on test day. And that's one of the big things. If you're ready to go, and you have a lot of energy and you have enough in your tank to get through the exam and more, you're doing something right. When it comes to your practice exams, don't chase a perfect score. It's easy to get caught up in the idea of achieving a high score in your practice exams, but it's important to remember that step 1 is a pass-fail exam. Your goal is to pass, not achieve perfection. And here's why. Passing is all that matters. You don't get brownie points for anything more. Step 1, because it's pass-fail, is so focused on getting the knowledge and skills you need to cross the pass line threshold, but overworking yourself in pursuit of this is counterproductive, especially because it can lead to burnout. Again, this is physically, emotionally, socially draining you. Like it is, like it's mentally draining. Thinking about it just makes me exhausted, right? And so don't let this dictate your life. Use practice exams for learning, not validation. The purpose of practice exams is to help you identify weak areas and improve, not validate your knowledge. A low score on a practice exam is an opportunity to adjust your approach, fill in the gaps before, and literally grow from it. If you're not using practice exams as a tool versus a test, then you're doing something wrong. Assessing practice exam relevance for step 1. This is a big one. While practice exams are valuable for building endurance and testing your knowledge, they can be misleading. After taking every available NBME, 25 through 31, all the UWorld self-assessments as well, plus sitting for step 1 twice, I realized that the question distribution on practice exams doesn't necessarily match the real thing. And that's where people get caught up. They'll pass a practice exam, but then when they take the real thing, they're like, this is not what I studied for. What the heck? Right? And so from that experience and also talking to other people, I realized that there's something a little off here. And so if we look at the step 1 question breakdown by system, and this is from the actual NBME distribution for 2024, we see that human development has an average of 2%, which out of 280 questions is going to be 6. Heme Onc, 11% average, translates to about 29 questions. Behavioral and neuro, about 12%. So 34 questions. MSK and Derm, 10%, so 27 questions. Cardio is about 9%, so about 24 questions. Renal and pulmonary, not renal or pulmonary, but renal and pulmonary together make up about 13% of the exam. And so that's about 35 questions. GI is about 8%, so 21 questions. Reproductive and endocrine is 11%, so about 31 questions. Multisystem is 14%, so that's 38 questions. Biostats is about 5%, so you could expect 13 questions on that. Social sciences, so like communications, those are about 8%, so it's about 21 questions. General principles is, which they've since gotten rid of and they dissipated it across all the different systems. But general principles is about 14%. And so, about 39 questions, right? And the official question breakdown by discipline. So if we're looking at about 280 questions and the percentages of those, for pathology, it's about 48%, and that's about 134 questions. So it's a big chunk. Physiology is about 30%, and so we could expect about 84 questions out of 280. Biochem, 19%. So about 53 questions of biochem. Pharmacology, 19% as well, and so about 52 questions. Anatomy and embryology combined is about 13%, and so 36 questions. Same thing with micro. Micro is about 13%, and we could get about 35 questions. The behavioral sciences, it's about 11%, and so we could expect about 29 questions on that. Histology and cell biology, it's about 11%, and so we could expect about 29 questions as well. Immunology, 9%, so 24 questions. And genetics, 7%, about 20 questions. And so this is the step 1 exam as the NBME has published. So an average of all the questions, a low range, a high range in terms of percentage out of 80, and then a estimate of what you could expect on any given step 1 exam. Again, it's a range, but for the most part, this is the exam. And so we have a little chart here that just allows us to see what these are going to look like, right? And so it's heavy on general principles, and it's heavy on behavioral health. It's heavy on multisystems. It's heavy on, renal and pulm, but individually renal and pulmonary are about half that, right? One of the things that sneaks up on you is how heavy communications is. It's just as much as GI, and it's almost just as much as cardio. So in terms of UWorld practice exams, the question analysis based off of 160 questions, we're just going to look at the raw numbers, right? So looking at the UWorld self-assessments 1, 2, and 3, and comparing that to what we could expect on step 1. And so each one of the adjusted numbers for step 1 that we can predict is going to be out of 160 instead of 280. And so if we look at this, human development, it's new. And so they don't really have a section for that in UWorld yet. But for step 1, out of 160 questions, we could expect in HemOnc, we could expect at least 17 questions on average. UWorld self-assessment 1, you could get about 18. UWorld 2, you get about 11. And UWorld 3, you get about 13, right? So UWorld 1 is probably the most reflective of what you could expect in terms of HemOnc. Behavioral health, on STEP, you could expect about 19. And UWorld 1, you get about 22. UWorld 2, you get about 26. UWorld 3, you get about 17, right? On MSK, on the real thing, you could expect about 15 out of 160. And so the one that fits closest to that is UWorld 2, with UWorld 1 getting 17, UWorld 2 getting 15, and UWorld 3 getting 14. Cardio, you could expect about 14 questions. And so UWorld 1, you get about 9. UWorld 2, you get about 20. UWorld 3, you get about 15, right? Pulmonary and renal, expect 20 on the exam. You get about 22 in UWorld 1, 15 in UWorld 2, and then 19 in UWorld 3. In GI, you can expect about 12 on the real thing. So 14 on UWorld 1, 12 in UWorld 2, 11 in UWorld 3. Endo and repro, you could expect about 18. And we get 26 on UWorld 1, 27 on UWorld 2, and 27 on UWorld 3. Multisystems, you can expect about 20, but they since changed things a little bit. So UWorlds aren't really reflective of like multisystems specifically. Biostats, you could expect about 7. This is where it gets really interesting because biostats is becoming more representative, and also communications. They're becoming a lot more representative. And so you could expect to get about 7, when we're adjusting it, right? And so UWorld 1, you only get 4. UWorld 2, you only get 2. UWorld 3, you get 7. So that's probably the most reflective. But UWorld 3 came out not too long ago. And the same thing can be said about the social sciences. UWorld 1, you get 1. UWorld 2, you get 0. In UWorld 3, you get 12. And on the real thing, you could expect 12. So this is probably the most representative. And then general principles, you could expect about 22. In UWorld 1, you get about 25. UWorld 2, you get about 30. In UWorld 3, you get about 23, which is pretty good. And so My personal opinion, UWorld 3 is probably the most reflective of what you could actually see in terms of content distribution. And so this is more of an accurate measurement compared to the other ones, and mainly because of the representation of general principles, communications, and biostats. When it comes to MBME practice exams, we could break down our analysis off of 200 questions instead of 280. But technically, if you really think about it, there's only going to be 200 scored questions out of the 280. And so the MBME practice exams are really just how many questions you could expect to get scored in terms of a raw score. So I guess it is a decent predictor in terms of like raw numbers, how many you need to get right to pass. But the content distribution is so off that it can be misleading, really misleading. If we're looking at the content analysis of the MBME practice exams from 25 to 31, we could actually look at it out of an adjusted score for step one of what you could expect based off of that percentage. And this is an average percentage, right? So instead of out of 280 questions, we have it out of 200 questions. So we don't have anything for human development, so it's not reflective of that. But HEMONC, we could expect about 21 questions. And so each one of the MBMEs, we will get 20 questions. In terms of behavioral and neuro, across the board, you get about 22 to 24 questions for the most part. MSK and Derm, you could expect about 19 questions, and you will get around 17 or 18, mainly 18, a little bit like 17 for 31. Cardio, you can expect about 17 questions, and you'll get 16 on the practice exams for MBMEs. Pulmonary, you can expect about 25, and about 22 to 23 questions will appear on each one of the MBMEs. DI, you could expect about 15, and you will get 14 on the practice exams. Endo and Repro, you could expect about 22, and about 24 to 25 will be on the practice exams. Multisystems, you could expect about 27, but you will only get 17 on the practice exams. Biostats, you could expect about 9, and you'll get about 10 to 11 on the practice exams. Social sciences, you could expect about 15, but you'll only get about 5 to 6 on MBMEs 25 through 30, with 9 on 31. And then general principles, you could expect about 28 on the actual thing, and you'll get about 28 on the actual practice exams. And so the big differences is the multi-systems and the communications. Those are really off. And if you're not used to seeing so many communications questions, that could be a make or break. From my experience, the most recent exams, MBME 31 and UWorld Self-Assessment 3, are the closest to the actual exam. Why? Because they include a much larger portion of communications questions and multi-system questions, which makes up a significant chunk of the actual exam compared to older exams. Older practice exams, in contrast, often overrepresent other topics, which can give you a false sense of, what's actually being emphasized on the current step one exam. Because every year they change it incrementally. And so if they're making incremental changes, but the practice exams are old, then over time, you're just going to see a large discrepancy in what is actually reflected on the exam. And that's just what happens. It's not intentional. It's not like jarring, but it's very subtle, and those changes just add up over time. If you compare the question breakdowns on these newer practice exams to the USMLE content distribution, like the official one, they align more closely with what you can expect on test day. Older forms don't reflect the same balance of topics, so relying heavily on these older ones can skew your preparation, and essentially they can be misleading. Always keep the official content breakdown in mind, and be aware that not all practice exams will be an accurate reflection of your step one experience when you actually take it. Adjusting your study plan based on practice exam schedules. The beauty of practice exams is that they provide you concrete data you can use to tweak your study plan. Here's how to adjust your study schedule after each exam. After each practice exam, review your weakest categories and focus your study sessions on those areas. For example, if you're just trash at biostats, prioritize it and spend that next week doing biostats every single day until you feel a little bit more comfortable with it. You kind of have to eat the crow. Just get through it, get over it, and build from there. Refine your question blocks. So instead of just doing random question sets, tailor your UWorld or your Amboss to focus on the weakest areas. but don't overdo it. If you miss a lot of questions in pharmacology, do a decent amount of pharmacology stuff every single day. Don't just do 100 questions one day and then not touch it. Focus on doing questions every single day and just make it just part of your regular routine now. And then increase review of challenging topics. The name of the game is just reviewing stuff. The more you can review, the less likely you're going to forget it. And so if a certain category consistently just drags your score down, just add an extra Anki card there or add some more to your crib sheets to reinforce that knowledge in that area. Use the feedback from your exams to guide your review sessions. If you are almost there, then make sure you're there. And if you weren't even close, then make sure you at least have a path towards knowing where to go when you see that question, style, or type again. Now let's turn the fat. So let's break it down. Practice exams aren't just for kicks. Every 2 to 3 weeks you could take one, but not every week, at least starting out. And especially not every day. You're building a strategy here. So, we're not auditioning for burnout. Don't do that. We don't have time for that. Don't freak out over scores. You're aiming to pass, not win a gold medal. Use the exams to figure out what you don't know and then fill in those gaps. And that's all part of this game. Go deep on mistakes. Got something wrong? Cool. That's a clue, not a failure. That's where you're going to spend your time. So dig into why and use it to sharpen your sword. Instead of doing content review on everything, just focus on the things that you actually just didn't get right or that you're not good with. Train for the main event. Put in practice like it's fight night. Sit down, no distractions, no snacks, crush it one go at a time. Build that endurance so you're not wiped out by block 6 or 7 on game day. And if you can do that, you're doing something right. Passing is winning. Step 1 isn't about perfection. You need to get a 63 to 64% on the exam to actually pass, right? It's a challenge, but you only need to get that. So once you hit that passing mark, it's all gravy for you. You can build from there. Don't overthink it. Get over the line, then move on. And bottom line, practice exams are just dress rehearsal. It's not the real thing. So use them to find your weak spots, tighten up your strategy, and get ready to deliver on that game day. Don't overdo it because quality is better than quantity. You're here to pass, not burn out chasing a perfect score. Because once you get to clinicals, they don't care as long as you pass because everybody has to pass. So next, we'll talk about you. Self-care isn't a luxury. It's necessary. We'll cover how to balance your study schedule with recovery so you don't break down crying from burnout before your exam. So stay tuned and we'll get after it. Thanks for checking this out. This is USMLE Step 1000 created by me, Stephen Christian, a space where you can turn your Step 1 prep into something smarter, sustainable, and stress-free. If you found this helpful, be sure to hit that subscribe button and stay tuned for more. You can follow us on Spotify for more study tips and more audio podcast stuff, Instagram at USMLE Step 1000, and you can like the Facebook page to stay connected. Don't forget to download all the resources, all the Anki decks, the clinical clues, everything from the PDFs and everything that you saw in the videos you can find at www.step1000.com. And follow the blog for more updates as well at www.usmlestep1000.com, your one-stop shop for everything Step 1000. And if you like what I'm doing here and you want to follow or at least support, you can check me out on social media at Stuck on an Island. Thanks again, and I look forward to sharing more stuff about Step 1 prep and how to overcome these mental hurdles so that you can have the best possible experience possible. So again, I'm not going to hold you any longer, but remember, let's keep pushing forward one step at a time to 1000.